Current agriculture, which consists of monocultures and extensive use of fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicides, has caused a significant loss of biodiversity, has decreased soil quality, and has polluted the environment. Due to rising awareness of these issues, researchers are now exploring alternatives, such as vertical indoor farms, hydroponics, and cultured meat. However, there is a clear divide in approaches toward future agriculture. Technologists rely on a predominantly tech-centric system, while organic farmers rely on natural methods such as polycultures, mixed farming with livestock and crops, and composting. Even though the two camps do not have much in common, the Pareto optimal solution for humanity and the environment may lie in the middle, tech-enhanced permaculture. By combining technology, permaculture, sustainable policies, and consumer behavior, we could heal our planet, reduce our blood pressure, and feed 10 billion people. Hers would have been a particularly poetic suicide. The asp was a symbol of royalty to the Egyptians, while the cobra was associated with Cleopatra's favorite goddess, Isis. There are several problems with this theory, according to modern Egyptologists. For one thing, cobras were typically at least 5 feet long, and could grow up to 8 feet, much too large to smuggle into Cleopatra's mausoleum in a basket of figs, as the story goes. In addition, not all snake bites are deadly, and those that are kill their victims slowly and painfully, making it hard to believe a snake was able to kill Cleopatra and her 2 maids in the short time it took for Octavian to receive her note and send his guards. If Cleopatra did poison herself to death, Schiff and others argue, it's more likely she drank in lethal herbal concoction, or applied a toxic ointment, as one ancient historian, Strabo, suggested. Either of these would have killed her, and her servants, more quickly and effectively than a snake bite. In 2010, the German historian Christoph Schaefer suggested that Cleopatra may have ingested a fatal mix of hemlock, wolfsbane and opium, based on his studies of ancient documents and his work with a toxicologist. The Golden Gate Bridge's builders introduced many innovations, but perhaps the most impressive was the precise and efficient technique they used to construct the massive cables. The bridge's designers carefully calculated the graceful dip of the suspension cables between the 2 towers to carry the needed weight. The cables had to be flexible enough to bend up to 27 feet laterally, in the gate's formidable winds, and strong enough to support the structure of the bridge. The planned cables would be so long and strong that they would need to be fabricated in place. The well-known engineering company of John Roebling and Sons oversaw the cable construction. Roebling had built many of the world's longest bridges, including the Brooklyn Bridge, 52 years earlier. The firm had devised the most efficient strength-to-rigidity ratio for cables. It had also developed a technique of spinning cables on-site. The Roebling crew's work on the Golden Gate Bridge continued a tradition of innovation. Cable spinning began in October 1935. To create the cables, Roebling developed a method called parallel wire construction. The innovative technique enabled a cable of any length and thickness to be formed by binding together thin wires. It promised to give engineers the freedom to build a bridge of infinite length. Hundreds of wires, each roughly the diameter of a pencil, were bound together into strands. Hydraulic jacks then bundled and compressed 61 strands to make a cable. Each of the 2 main cables is just over 3 feet in diameter, 7,659 feet long, and contains 27,572 parallel wires. The Golden Gate uses the largest bridge cables ever made, long enough to encircle the world more than 3 times at the equator. Up until the late 1960s, long-haired male visitors to Disneyland were stopped at the park gates by cast members who politely informed the hirsute guests that they did not meet the standards of Disneyland's unwritten dress code and therefore would not be allowed to enter the park. Disneyland's appearance code for employees, instituted in the 1950s, prohibited male cast members from sporting mustaches, beards, or long hair. Back when the code was implemented, facial hair was perceived as conveying a negative image to many Americans, who associated beards and mustaches on young men with beatniks, un-American activities, and in the 1960s hippies. Disney's philosophy was that customers preferred park workers to be wholesome and well-scrubbed, And some of the same appearance restrictions they placed on their employees were applied to other park guests as well. For example, Jim McGinn, future founder of the Birds, was turned away from Disneyland in 1964 merely for sporting a beetle cut. Disneyland's no long hair policy for male guests was not instituted as a reaction to the Yippie invasion that forced the park to close early one day in 1970. In fact, the opposite was true. The only reason the long-haired Yippies were allowed in the park that day in the first place was because the restriction had already been relaxed. One very unusual feature of the Great Pyramid is a concavity of the core that makes the monument an 8-sided figure, rather than 4-sided like every other Egyptian pyramid. That is to say, that its 4 sides are hollowed in or indented along their central lines, from base to peak. This concavity divides each of the apparent 4 sides in half, creating a very special and unusual 8-sided pyramid. The hollowing in can be noticed only from the air, and only at certain times of the day. This explains why virtually every available photograph of the Great Pyramid does not show the hollowing in phenomenon, and why the concavity was never discovered until the age of aviation. Apparently, the 8 sides were discovered entirely by accident in 1940 when a British Air Force pilot, P. Groves, flew over the pyramid and realized the concavity, taking a picture that is now famous among those who are into this sort of thing. There's an area in the Chihuahuan Desert in northern Mexico where the radio signals don't work, and compasses spin out of control when placed near stones on the ground. It's called the Zone of Silence. It measures only 50 kilometers across, and it is located in the Mapimay Biosphere Reserve, a huge, mostly uninhabited expanse of almost 400,000 hectares, where the flat and desolate terrain is interspersed with lonely mountain outcrops. The disruption is believed to be caused by subterranean deposits of magnetite, as well as debris from meteorites. The zone's overall effects, and even its location, are disputed, but there's no doubt that the area, which sits on the borders of the Mexican states of Chihuahua, Durango, and Coahuila, has an abundance of celestial activity including, some say, visits from UFOs and extraterrestrials.